Hi, I am Donna Wallace, and this is my third attempt to get this video done. I'm not real, I'm okay with technology, but it frustrates me and it kind of makes me grouchy, so I don't like to have to dabble there when things don't work, so we're going for the third time. I'm going to be talking about bipolar disorder, and we're going to go through an explanation of the order, a bit of history on the disorder, and the key diagnostic criteria, and then some final thoughts from my own personal experience. Explanation of the order, I'm going to give you two. One is going to be the textbook, and the other one is going to be explanation of the disorder by Donna. The textbooks will tell you that bipolar disorder is sometimes called manic depressive. That's kind of what it was called a few decades back, and it's actually associated with mood swings, the very, very low depression and then the high manic episodes. The bipolar disorder is divided into two main subtypes, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Bipolar 2 is actually the lesser severe of the two, and the bipolar 1 is what my daughter was diagnosed with. There are mood swings with bipolar 1 that cause significant difficulty in your job, in your school, in your relationships, and yes, we checked all to the above there, and so that was the case with us. On a more grassroots or very plain and simple explanation of the disorder, I could give in one word. Can you see that? Oops, let me get that in there. That is chaos. That's the explanation for bipolar disorder. It really is chaos. And if you don't have your own stuff in order as a parent, if you don't have your head on the way it should be on, and your heart in the right place, and your spirit in check, it's still chaos, but it's manageable chaos. Let's look at the history. I was kind of fascinated by this bit of information. The terms used for bipolar, the manic depressive, manic term comes from the Greeks. Melos, meaning black, and chloe, bile. Hippocrates thought that this disorder, manic depressive, was actually the result of having too much black bile in your system. The ancient Greeks, in particular an individual named Artaeus of Cappadocia, was a physician as well as a philosopher. He was in the 1st century AD, around the time of Nero, and he actually described patients who demonstrated both extremes. He found them laughing and playing and making public spectacles of themselves, and partying and dressing outlandishly in public, and at other times these same people would be sorrowful and dull, and he actually suggested, Artaeus did, that these symptoms are one in the same disorder, or resulting from the same disorder. And our modern idea of bipolar originated in Paris, 19th century Paris, where two physicians described the disorder. One called it dual form insanity, and the other called it circular insanity, and they believed it clustered in families, and we now know that there is a strong genetic component to this disorder. Now, the distinction between patients with the manic and depressive and those with only the depression emerged in the 1960s. The term bipolar disorder is fairly recent. I believe it was introduced in the 1980s. and it began to have a wider acceptance so that patients wouldn't feel the stigma that would be related to manic depressive moniker. So that's when that was introduced. I learned that due to informal or poor screening, the average time, and this is astonishing to me, excuse me, I'm sorry, my phone's going off. Due to the informal or poor screening, the average time between onset of symptoms and formal diagnosis is more than 7 years. That was really astounding to me. For Emily, I knew something was awry, and when it became just apparent that this was not going away or wasn't related to, say, her last semester of school or working long hours on her job or whatever, I had her in for assessment to various providers. It probably took a year for us to finally get to that diagnosis. And we went through medical exams. She went for a while to a psychologist, and she was really only treated for the depression, not the manic. But I really began to notice that, and I stepped up my game and got her into someone who specialized in it. I'm referencing an article by Miller, Johnson, and Eisner, 2009, from the Clinical Psychology, Science, and Practice journal. The title is Assessment Tools for Adult Bipolar. The two most commonly used interviews to assess bipolar are the structured clinical interview and the schedules for affective disorders and schizophrenia. Emily did have a lengthy interview. Her treatment started with a psychiatrist with a full physical exam to rule out anything else that might be impacting her behavior. Probably an hour and a half conversation, interview face-to-face with the psychiatrist. Then Emily answered a rather lengthy assessment questionnaire, which was probably one of these two. At that point, he determined that it warranted putting her through some additional assessments. She had an IQ test, rated extremely high on that. She had an EQ test, very high on that. She had a brain scan, which, if you remember in our textbook, was referenced on page, I believe, 429, images that were taken from a brain that was undergoing the depressed state that was mainly bluish colors, and then the very excitable, flashy colors of reds and orange and yellows that were in the brain of an individual who was experiencing the manic side. So he did do the brain scan, and that confirmed, you know, along with the other tools that he used, she was then confirmed as a bipolar I disorder diagnosis. One of the areas I touched on briefly was the heritability factor. In twin studies, they have concluded that there is a 90% heritability factor for bipolar disorder. So if you have a mother or brother or sister or father with this disorder, then there's a strong genetic component that may possibly be passed on. For Emily, it was relief actually for her to hear about the factors, genetic factors on either side of her family. On my side of the family, we have, my brother is diagnosed with OCD. I'm OCD. I mean, I just kind of diagnosed myself, and my daughters have too, and that's okay. I have my mom and two sisters, severe depression, and I actually am treated for depression. The onset was after the tragic loss of my twin sons, and I've just struggled with that ever since. So there had to be that genetic vulnerability in my gene pool. On Emily's dad's side, his mother suffered, and both sisters suffered from very, very deep, long-term depression. And he has a half-sister who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So when the psychiatrist learned this from us, he turned and looked at Emily and said, "Gee, Emily, you really had the cards stacked against you in the genetic pool, didn't you?" And we all kind of chuckled. But it was comic relief. It really was, because Emily was feeling a lot of pressure, like this was all her fault and all about her, and something that she was going to have to figure out. Not that it was a family affair, and truly it was a family affair, and that's the way that we approached it. So that was very helpful and helped take some of the stigma away from her. My final word is referencing an article I saw. It was a 2011 article. I'm sorry I don't have the name of it with me at this moment, but I will reference it in my paper. The article was concerning religion and spirituality in the context of bipolar disorder, and the conclusion was just outrageous. Findings in the studies suggest that religion and spirituality strategies may be important for some people in the management of bipolar disorder. I read that and I thought, you think? God is a great God, and I just find it incredible that scientists and psychologists and theorists are coming to that conclusion based upon studies that they're doing in the laboratory. It certainly made a difference for us, and it will make a difference for you, whether you are engaged in the therapeutic treatment of a patient or you're actually experiencing it real time in your life or in the life of someone that you are close to. For Emily, God brought us through that valley that was so deep, so seemingly insurmountable. We really clung to each other, and we clung to the Lord. I clung to the Lord. Emily wanted to, but she just couldn't. She knew God was there, and she knew here that He loves her, and she'd made a profession of faith and all of that. But when this hit her, it stripped all of that away. But I knew God was in this, and I knew God was going to see us through, and I would not accept anything less. And God did that, and He healed her after probably a time frame of 8 to 10 years, from the very earliest symptoms to the tail end of the diminishing symptoms, about 8 to 10 years. And God has healed her, and she is a different young woman today. You'll see that in my PowerPoint. But I just encourage you to, regardless, even though now our scientists and philosophers are coming up with this conclusion, we know that to be true. And I encourage you to trust the Lord, and I encourage you to cling to Him and believe Him that He does have our good in mind, and He will see us through the deep waters and the deep valleys. And I thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and may the Lord truly bless you in all that you do.